Do you see great value in the American system of primaries compared with what we have in Australia?
Yes, look, I mean, again, it's a much bigger country, so I think it's probably easier to do that. I mean, I don't know if that's necessarily fair, but I mean, I like them, and I think the candidates in Australia, certainly on the Labor side, but also on the Liberal side, are kind of chosen by too few people. I mean,
Exactly.
there've been attempts over the years in the Liberal Party to democratise it, but my understanding is they didn't get very far, those reform movements, which is a shame. And so, yeah, so I think there is, virtue in that primary process. It also makes it easier for successful people later in their career to enter politics in the US, whereas it's much harder in Australia if you haven't built those kind of insider networks, which are so crucial in Australia for winning pre-selection. So you end up with staffers and so forth staying there their entire lives and then being pre-selected, and they've really done nothing else except be a political staffer.
I must say that in 2016, I thought that Ted Cruz was the best Republican candidate. I was very impressed by him, particularly by what he said. But once Trump won, and then I saw his address, I shouldn't say address, his speech in Gettysburg and what his agenda was, I thought, well, that's a very good agenda. And if he achieves a good part of that, that will be a good presidency. The system seems to produce a good president every so often, and I think a really great president, you really have to go back to Reagan as a truly great president in recent American history.
Yeah, look, I think that's fair. I mean, Trump, I think if you kind of take away his name from the equation and just look at the statistics of that 2016 to 20 period, as you suggest, it was quite a good period in American history. I mean, the economy was very strong until COVID hit. Foreign policy, I agree with you. There were no new wars. The world was relatively peaceful. In the US, there were tax cuts and the economy boomed. But the problem is a large minority of Americans really hate Donald Trump very much. And I think that's a problem. I mean, even if you like Donald Trump or appreciate his presidency, I think the fact that he's so loathed is a problem, because even if he won again, there'd be civil unrest and it would make governing the country difficult, I think. But that said, he may win again, but I do worry that if he does, it'll be a very volatile period in US history.
I know some people in Sydney, and you just have to just say Donald Trump and they shake with rage, inexplicable rage. Yeah. He does seem to create that. But I remember that used to happen sometimes with Tony Abbott. People reacted irrationally to the name Tony Abbott. One of the questions is how clean will the election be? And I know that it's very difficult to prove fraud, but I thought the case that Texas brought to the Supreme Court with, I think, 17 other attorneys, it was knocked out, I think, because the judges were too frightened to handle it because their own lives were in threat. And we had Schumer making that threat on the steps of the court. But that case that Texas brought was they call it in America the independent state legislature theory. Well, it's not really a theory, it's there in the Constitution. It's for the legislature of each state to control and make the electoral law. Yes. And you've had all sorts of people changing state laws, quite often to advantage the Democrats, particularly for ballot harvesting. Yes. Has that been cleaned up to a reasonable degree, do you think? The ease of ballot harvesting, for example, which, I mean, you just have somebody go around to the immigrants and tell them they're from the government or they're from the authorities. They're here to help by collecting the electoral ballots.
Yes, well, my understanding is that many of the larger Republican states have changed their rules since 2020. Most famously, Georgia, that endured the greatest criticism on that front. But certainly there will be much more focus on the integrity of the 2024 election than there was on the 2020 election at the time, because we hopefully won't have a pandemic in 2024. So many of those rules, those temporary rules won't be there.